Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club. This is a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers play games from the past and talk about their relevance and impact today. I am Tim Longo, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, even though they are all grown up, still has a hard time not calling either of his sons boy.
Kratos. No, I'm Brett Duville. Sorry.
Okay, good. The spirit of Kratos is within you.
Very much so.
And unlike most episodes, as in the intro, I said we play games from the past. This is a bonus episode, so we actually are playing a game from today.
Right.
As a contrast for our previous series, which was God of War, the original God of War 1 from 2005. And we thought it would be cool to play the recently released God of War 2018 and talk about sort of the, where the franchise has come, how, where it's gone to from there and its long road, and kind of see how things have evolved. And so we've only played a bit. Brett has gotten farther than I have.
For people who've played, I've played basically to the end of Alfheim, which will mean something to people who have played and not a lot to Tim.
Yeah, cool. Well, what are your opening thoughts so far?
So it's funny. On the one hand, there's so much modern design packed into this thing, in terms of all the RPG elements and the powering up this and getting different armor that, and just tons of extra stuff that's grafted on top of the old formula. And the immediate sense of the combat feels a little different just because it's not quite as button mashy, I feel. There are combos and things like that you can sort of power up and learn and get through XP, much in the same way as the old one, a little bit deeper. But there are some definite similarities in the structure. It's not as linear, I feel like at some point we're actually going to be able to go back and forth around the realms and things like that, because it feels like that's just a modern design element that they've brought in. But when you're in a level and you're kind of going around and doing the main story stuff, it does feel like, there's some little dead ends where you might find some secrets and things. It's combat, then explore a little bit, then combat,
chests.
And chests, exactly, and finding things. So I definitely feel that lineage. And then one of my big takeaways from the original was pushing the technology, and this game is A, gorgeous, and B, achieves that through some of the same tricks. Not so much with the camera, but whenever you make a 3D environment where you have physics, you have different levels of fidelity, and because the player can't go everywhere, it's not like Skyrim, for example. The player can't go literally everywhere, so not everything needs to be as perfectly physically modeled. It looks great, so they're still really good at things like pixel density matching everywhere, because there are some large creatures that turn up eventually, and so it is. I feel the lineage very much, especially moment to moment, and then in kind of some of the bigger boss battle type things that happen. But then there's just this huge amount of stuff that modern gamers love, grafted onto it, and it feels okay. I mean, it mixes pretty well for me. How about you? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of the same thoughts. It's funny because I think we talked about this in the previous episodes, but I don't remember which ones you've played, which are the other series, but
all of them.
Oh, you have? Okay, yeah, because
Yes.
I haven't played any but the first one, maybe dabbled in a couple others, but so I have for me, it is very literally the one we played for the podcast and now this one for the most part.
Yeah, I should say 1, 2, and 3, not, I guess there was Ascension that I didn't play, right? So anything on a hand, and anything on a handheld at all, I haven't played.
But the core one,
the core 1, 2, and 3 I played. That's kind of what I think of as the series. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, and 3 and Ascension being on PS3.
No, 3 was on the PS. Oh, and Ascension, yes, was also on the PS3.
Yeah,
and there was definitely like Ghost of Sparta or something that was on a handheld.
There were 2, I think. ready at
Yeah,
home.
I think there were two, and one was on the Vita. I think I have it. I think it was a freebie for PlayStation Plus at one point.
I think I have it too, actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, so anyway, just to give context for sort of my comparison is literally the one we played and this one. So it's, and I don't know how much the others really changed the structure, but it is funny to kind of see, like you said, some of the God of War isms, but reimagined in this game, like I mentioned, the chests and finding these collectibles kind of randomly, strewn about. The sort of obviously I only dove into it a little bit, but the fairly elaborate progression and upgrade system compared to, I'm sure that's what you were alluding to as well.
Right. That's what I meant.
To the simplicity of the first one, and with some modern day trappings, and then this interesting camera commitment that, we talked a lot about. One of my takeaways for the first one was the commitment to the camera on the fully scripted controlled camera. And this is an interesting, different camera decision that they made, which is intriguing.
Equally committed.
Yeah, equally committed. Yeah, exactly. So, as people probably know, there's no camera cuts. And so there are cinematics essentially, but it smoothly goes from gameplay to the cinematics and never loads or cuts. And so there's very interesting, seamless feel to it, even during combat, even when you have right stick control over the camera. And I think the interesting thing about it for me that because I hear people at work talking about it and everyone obviously is gushing about it. And so maybe I had a little bit high hopes for the camera being, almost, elegantly perfect in some way, because it was this cool, committed thing that they chose to do. I guess I was surprised that I've been kind of frustrated with it in combat, specifically because now they're not, like we talked about
they're not all visible, right?
Yeah, they're not framing the arenas with a scripted camera, above you, or sort of like, panning back or tracking backwards so you can see a bigger picture. You actually have to manage where you are and where the enemies are, with your own stick, which is a little more Dark Souls, and even some of the button usage and mapping is more Dark Souls. So you can see their influences and kind of some of the evolutions of things. And even I'd say the combat has some of those, like a simplified version. And I guess now that I think about it, we kind of talked about the same thing for the first one, which was a combo-based high action combat system that was a simplified version of other sort of like Devil May Cries and the sort of hack and slash, character action games from Japan. So maybe there's some interesting correlations there. But
I hadn't actually thought about that. That's very true, because even as you gain combos, as you gain abilities, it's more likely that they're mapped onto button combinations that you already know. So, for example, you power up some ability with your axe, and you're still just holding down the R1 key to execute that. There's not a lot of square, triangle, or triangle, circle, or that sort of thing. And even the finishing moves tend to be, rather than a more elaborate QuickTime event, tend to be run up and push R3.
Just one button.
One button. You see the thing, and that feels like a little bit of Doom 2016, although that. I guess that sort of had the button press. Yeah, there was sort of a point where you're like, oh, I can do this gory grab and kill type thing, and it feels a little bit like that in the way that it slows down to do that. So that's another influence that I can definitely feel. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say with the camera stuff, the thing that I guess I hadn't anticipated, because it basically has over the shoulder, Tomb Raider / Resident Evil 4 kind of style of camera throughout most of the framing of the character when you're in pretty much in control. And so it's got this, even just that choice has changed the tone of the game quite a bit, because, in the first one, the camera was sometimes close to Kratos, but it was most of the time was medium or long shot from, as far as being far away from him. So it gave you a sense of epicness, and it kind of gave him this sort of like removed, I don't know, removed feeling from the player and from the camera, and here it's like
Right.
it's pretty close to him most of the time.
I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about with that, because I think when you look at the original God of War series, and yes, 1, 2, and 3 are essentially the same game in terms of how they play. You're talking about a character that you want a certain amount of psychological distance from because he's so horrible.
Yeah.
Right. He is definitely an anti-hero here. And we'll get into Atreus or whatever himself a little bit later. But here, I think Kratos is meant to be immediately more accessible, less of it. I mean, he's still a stubborn jerk, but
he's trying.
But he's trying. He's older. I don't know why that appeals to me. There's something about that connects. But he also
I know why that is.
And he's closer. It's because I've gotten so muscle bound. It's that.
Got it. Your scar on your stomach that you relate.
That's right. Yeah, I've been jabbed through by I don't know, Zeus or somebody. But he's got there's a lot more closeness to the character as well, right? And you're not as distant, and in a way, I think the combat is also a little bit. I mean, it's certainly plenty violent and things like that, but it's not super button mashy and schizophrenic. It's more deliberate. It's not as ranged, so there's that too. That most of your combat is actually fairly close up, because the axe takes a while to move around. So we can talk about that a little bit more too, because there's a lot to grab onto here. But I felt like the camera choice. Oh, and then the final thing I was going to say is that I also feel like the Norse mythos, even though it is more, it is just as epic and all of that, I do feel like there's more, and we've talked about this maybe off air in the past. It does feel like a more psychologically rich mythos, and so this closeness to the character as he's going to encounter that also feels kind of apt in a way. It all feels like it fits together extremely well. And maybe I favor Kratos partly because of the camera, because before they were trying to isolate him from us a little bit.
The result of that in a weird way makes him more relatable, maybe. And I think with Atreus there, that has the same effect. And I have a counter to that I'll bring up later, but for myself at least. But yeah, I think that's.
I have some counters.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, but I think it's an interesting choice to, if you can imagine some of the goals that they had, creative goals that they had of making not necessarily, I don't know, we'll see where the story goes eventually, I guess, but with no spoilers, because I haven't played and I don't know if this is the case, but you could sort of see this game as a bit of a redemption arc kind of game for not even just in the story itself, but in a meta sense, of like making the character relevant again. Which every big franchise has been going on for, trust me, I've been through it. Every big franchise goes through this. Like, how do you keep a character who has become long on the tooth and unrelatable and kind of like missing the mark and make them relatable again, and in fact,
and that's super interesting because, of course, with thinking particularly of Tomb Raider, right? You do that by going back, making her young and more vulnerable, right? And here you're sort of, he's not really any more vulnerable, although he does feel more vulnerable in a way because his attacks are not as ranged based as well, right? Because although he can throw the axe and throw it basically any distance, there's a lot more time involved in that than there was with the Blades of Chaos, right? So throwing that, it takes a while to go there, and then you've got to remember to pull it back. I always forget, which is also an interesting innovation and a really interesting choice, and I think about it a lot because it makes you feel really connected to that weapon in a way you didn't really feel, I think, in the other games. But it also adds that time of like, well, that's gone, and maybe it's frozen an enemy, and I just want to leave it stuck in him so that I can deal with these other ones. And so you already are just like, I'm not going to have the ranged weapon at all. You have the help of Atreus, but even that, it's a button you've got to kind of jam on and have aimed, and that feels kind of weird because you're not pulling the bow. He's somewhere else. You may not even be able to see him, and you're just hoping that he can get a shot at what you're aiming at. So that part is a little strange. I like it overall, and I've been told on stream that gets much more powerful as time goes on, because you can level up the boy's characteristics as well. So
yeah. So I mean, I applaud them for, like, I definitely, as somebody who, as I was vocal in the previous 3 episodes about this franchise and about this character, I will say they're chipping away at some of my skepticism about it. They haven't succeeded completely yet, and if I continue playing, I hope that that I can, I can kind of see where they could go with it, and maybe
I've already started to dip my toes in some things where I'm like, oh, this is there's some stuff here that I didn't expect. And it's not big like oh my god, this god came. I'm expecting stuff like that. That's not going to surprise me. But what I mean is, for example, and we should probably touch on this because we talked about the female form in connection with the first one and kind of its maturity level. I was a little, in the outset, I was like, oh, I mean, effectively a frigid woman, right? At the beginning, although we didn't see her die, and like it's not a motivating force, so it's not really a true sort of fridging that happens in like a superhero comic book or whatever. But it's pretty close, and the character seems, obviously you never meet the character, so she seems entirely one-dimensional. I do like the smallness of the story of we're going to go put her ashes where she wanted to be placed, which is a really nice motivation, and small and appreciated, and not just some giant thing that they're trying to do, but just this, we're just going to do this thing she wanted. So that's good. I've already found as time has gone on, and like I said, I'm towards the end of Alfheim, that her character is actually getting richer, even though I still haven't met her in any way, in a real way.
Because of what people say about her.
Because I'm learning more about her through Atreus, a little bit through Kratos and something he's experienced. So there are some touches there that I'm like, well, this is actually pretty interesting. So, and it's surprising because it is, again, because it's small and psychological and close. And I don't know, that's been very appealing to me.
Yeah, well, and goes without, I don't even think goes without saying, we don't even have to kind of analyze it because it's so obvious, but the choice to have a companion character at all, right, changes this character fundamentally, let alone his son, let alone a child or a boy, like having somebody for him to respond to because of his previous, sort of his previous status in the game, in the original game, where it was just kind of like him against the world, and he had this bone to pick, and he had this history, and everyone was kind of reacting to what he was choosing to do. Now you have somebody to provide commentary the whole time, and then layering on top of that, it's somebody he has a relationship with, and then layering on top of that, it's somebody he cares for, supposedly. Although I will say, as a quick side note, it's not landing for me quite yet because I feel like it's a little heavy-handed and forced from what I've seen, kind of the motions where he's kind of trying to reach out and touch his shoulder from behind, but then hesitates and doesn't do it. It's like, okay, that's a little on the nose.
I think that often their dialogue is quite good, especially as you go further in.
Yeah,
there's some funny.
Good. Yeah.
The writing's been pretty solid, and I will say too, and this is touching on another thing we mentioned. That the original series was really strong at was very animation forward, and that also is another bit of continuity. This feels very animation forward. There's still, and I think that's more common today, so it's not something we normally remark on. But I do feel like that was an impact that game, really that era of game, but especially the sort of the top lights of it, and then the early of PS3 and 360 era, I think cemented, where it's like, oh, we have more memory. We can only throw so much texture at the screen. What else do we spend memory on? Oh, let's put it in animation, right? And of course you're seeing that here, I think. as well.
I mean,
And I think it's worth at least touching on to say, look, they're still animation forward. They still have some pretty amazing animators, and not surprising with Corey Barlog at the head of it all.
I mean, it goes. We have to speak to. I mean, the craftsmanship of this game is incredible, like top to bottom. Let alone some of the, separate from some of the maybe particular design choices here and there, but as far as the animation, the level art and level design seems okay. Pretty basic, but and
gets better. Still early. Early on. I mean, you're basically in the tutorial area still, right? So there are some limits to what you're going to see.
I know it opens up too and becomes more hub and spokey and stuff, which so I'm kind of excited that happens and you get some of that more exploration that I feel like was forced in the original and kind of didn't fit well because it felt like that was a goal that they had, but they didn't support that goal with camera design and level design. So here I'm hoping, because I have more control of my camera and because it sounds like they're going to open up the structure some and maybe even have some fast traveling and stuff that excites me, because those are things that I was critical of with the previous, formula. But I mean, to shift gears a little bit, like despite, and before I go into a little bit of criticism, the pacing and tone change, I definitely appreciate. Oh, by the way, for anyone who has liked this game and has not watched the TV show Vikings, originally on History Channel, but it ends up on Hulu as well. It's an incredible show, semi-historical, but just very grounded and very, very brutal and very, I don't know. What do I know as far as like if it's that accurate about that time frame, but it gives me the impression that they do a good job at relating to that culture in the sort of when they were becoming explorers and when they were starting to leave their homeland and go to England and stuff. And the way that they interact with the gods, which is interesting for this game, because as you said, like the sort of tone of Norse mythology is very different too. And you can see in that show, which I think I can't imagine the show not being an influence for this game, that the culture and their way of life and the way that they survive as a culture is very directly related to their myths, as is everybody's myths. And, Greek myths are kind of opulent and kind of have this different tonal quality because of what the Greeks and the Romans were, kind of how they ruled and how they conquered.
Well, and living in the sun-drenched Mediterranean.
Mediterranean, right? Yeah, it's very Mediterranean. Yeah, good point. And then, just the way that the Norse myths work with what the Norse people were going through just day-to-day life it's really fascinating. So I definitely appreciate that kind of pacing change and tone change, because they definitely aren't afraid, so far, at least in the areas that I've played, they're not afraid of having some downbeats and just kind of resting there, which and letting a moment be a moment, when in the previous games that seems like it would never have happened. But then
more of that to come.
Good. Well, and that's exciting to hear. The criticism that I didn't want to still put out there, and you mentioned the kind of, I know they're not intentionally dismissing the mother, but it sounds like that grows on you over time. So that's good to hear. But it's just still so testosterone filled. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, and he's still the God of War, Tim. You don't get to retire.
It's not necessarily toxic masculinity per se.
It kind of is.
Is it?
When you can't just tell your boy that you love him.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess
that's what toxic masculinity is. So
yeah, I guess
so,
you're right.
I mean, I think that is part of that, right? There's just no getting away from that. I think all action heroes are kind of like that. It's I mean, he's not entirely stoic either, but he's way more stoic than, for example, you or I would be if we happen to be the gods of war.
Yeah.
Not happening that I know of, but there's always time.
Well, I mean, as a prediction, as a hopeful prediction, if I do continue playing the rest of the game someday, this tension that they're building up between he and Atreus, as far as like how he's teaching Atreus to be hard-hearted and not care about the enemy in order to survive and to win, which is very much a theme in Vikings, the show, by the way, because there is a son and essentially their version of the god of war of Kratos. Obviously not a god, but he's a badass, and it shows very much the sense of survival that you need, but there's no supernatural stuff. But I hope, and the fact that he is sort of like, I don't want to say ruining the boy, but he's making the boy
a jock. He's a jock who's a father to a theater kid.
Okay, you took the words right out of my mouth.
I mean, they're clearly very different sorts of people, and I mean, I don't. It's hard to know yet how much of that comes from Faye, the mother, because I don't have enough of a sense yet of the broader relationship. Mm-hmm. The axe. One thing you will learn is the axe was actually made for Faye. That was her axe, That's cool. Which is kind of interesting.
That's really interesting.
It does make her richer and makes her strong. Even in her absence, which is interesting. She's also some kind of magician or powerful.
Oh yeah, because the barrier that was around
was her
handprints, right?
Right. She had made a barrier, and they've basically knocked the barrier down, and that's why one of the gods is able to find him.
Right? Yeah, that's. I was wondering what had changed for that to occur, and then they talk about that later. So that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess my hope, which to your point about sort of like the tone, who Kratos is versus the boy, and how it kind of feels like he's trying to bend the boy towards something that he really doesn't want to be or should be. But that's such a trope, right? That concept of like, you got to grow up because you need to survive. Like it kind of reminds me a little bit of The Road, for instance, or something like that.
That's an excellent pull. It's very much like that.
The stakes are high, right? So you kind of like the boy has to do it if he's going to survive, and so because Kratos knows that maybe someday he won't be around. However, I hope that somewhere along the road, which is also a trope, no pun intended on the road, that Kratos realizes that his way is not the only way. Maybe he learned something from Atreus eventually.
I've already had a moment where Kratos had to question
his own.
Not so much his attitudes, but the facts and his perception of the world. Let's just say, and so there have already been glimmers where I'm just like, wow, this game's doing a lot. I mean, it's starting from some really tropey places, but it's reaching for some stuff, and I kind of get starting from a place of comfort, and I mean, it's a whole discussion in the industry these days, especially on games Twitter, about all the dad games that there are. And because and The Last of Us was kind of the big example prior to this, where we're all getting older, all us men who've been in the games industry for a long time, and now we've had kids, and now we're trying to explore our feelings about fatherhood and all of those things, and I get that, and at the same time, there are stories of interest, there are feelings of interest to explore there. Yes, it's kind of sad that we're getting there so late or whatever. I mean, I've had kids the whole time, basically, I've been in the industry, which is why Reddy had all those kids in the Starfighter games. I mean, most of that was cut.
Oh my God, that is something else.
That's a deep cut. Did
you just come up with that on the fly?
I just on the fly.
I see.
Where can I take this? What strange realm can this go to?
But the irony is you're relating yourself to Reddy, so then I'm like confused at that being an intentional thing. But anyway,
Anyway, what a team. But yeah, I mean, I would rather have those stories than not, even if they're about dads. And I think that's a start in the direction of, yes, we can tell more mature stories, and therefore maybe we can tell different stories. And there's already been some glimmers of different sorts of things in this game as you get a little, through the Alfheim section. And there's some other suspicions I have. There's another character who comes in briefly, and how each of them react to that character are different sides. Very different. I was going to say different sides of a coin, just different coins. I mean, they're just not there. They have very different concerns relative to this character. And I think that is something that it's a dialectic that they're having in a way, right? They're having a conversation through these ideas, and you get the sense that, well, yeah, I'm not sure I want to be Kratos. I understand where Kratos is coming from, but I also not sure that's who I would want to be. And so it gives you kind of an out emotionally for where you think the boy might end up. So,
yeah. Well,
so there's some interesting things.
Yeah, and it gives you essentially two main characters to relate to for different reasons, right? So at least the spectrum's broader than just the original games where you just had him. So that's probably good opportunity as well. Yeah, I guess I don't know. Unless there's a big swing there, it's going to be hard for me to really. And this is just me personally, to be honest, right? I totally think you can see that the craft that they've put into it, is really starting to resonate, and has resonated with people, and they've succeeded at achieving their goals in that regard. Just for me personally, I think, the horizons of the world are sort of like stretching. I don't know. I just, this game was in development for a while, so they didn't really have the luxury of the landscape around us, the media landscape around us to draw upon. But I think it's, the old dad and son trope is not a new thing, and I feel like we need some new things out there. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's probably why it's living with my wife and daughter who are very vocal in their representation. So that's all. But that's just a personal thing.
No, I know. You just want the Gilmore Girls game. I know. I get it.
That would be amazing. Maybe I should make that game. That's.
I'm sure the license is out there.
Yeah, but the other point I wanted to make, shifting gears some, that I'm still undecided on somewhat, but because, like you said, I'm still kind of in the early days, early hours, so it's hard to tell. So far, some of the other gameisms that they've added in, like for instance, resource collection and crafting and different level of enemies based on your level. So like meeting a purple enemy.
Meeting that purple enemy, yeah.
Yeah, and so stuff like that. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It feels a little in contrast to what the rest of the game is trying to do. But because, like you said earlier, these are game designs that are aspects of game designs that we're familiar with and sort of we accept at this point. Maybe they're fine, but it does feel like maybe they're a little bit kind of square peg round hole so far for me. But maybe that will change as I play.
I mean, I haven't run into any more. I only ran into the one purple dude so far, the whole game, as much as I've played, right? So 8 hours, say, and I went back to that a couple times. I mean, it took me a while. It took me several tries to beat that. I guess one of the things I appreciate about it is it's clearly optional. And it's sort of their signal to you that, no, this is meant to be hard, which is something I guess I appreciate if you're going to explore and find that thing and find that guy, and it's making it clear. And it's also, I guess, teaches you something. I guess some of this
later you'll be more powerful, so he won't be purple.
That is probably true. Although I did defeat him when it was purple.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, but that's your choice. So which is good.
Yes, right. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that either. It does feel, that stuff does feel almost arcadey in a way. And that does feel jarring from the rest of the tone of the game.
But it might, because, if it sounds like they have, because I mean, people definitely seem to generally like that stuff in this game, from friends and stuff who've played it. But if they appropriately sort of network those systems together down the road as you are progressing and exploring, and you want to go back once you've leveled up to kind of find there's a good reason to go back and, and kind of seek out these other enemies, or the resources really become valuable in a different way because everyone kind of likes loot and upgrading loot and stuff. So if that expands more, then maybe, I will fall into the sort of good
Yeah,
trap.
I'm not a super loot guy myself, I have to say. So I'm already finding myself a little frustrated with that because I don't really know. I mean, I know what all the numbers do. I mean, I get, oh, this does this and this, right? Oh, this makes it so I can use my special more often, and this, right? I get all that. I mean, it's not that I don't understand it. It's just I don't really have a good sense of what type of player I am in this game, and so what do I want to lean into? And so essentially, those choices become random for me.
Yeah.
And so that is a sort of thing where I'm like, I don't actually know. Like, am I going to be doing this all the time and want the short cooldowns and not care so much about the strength or whatever? Or am I more a defensive player? And what is that? I mean, I'm having a very hard time connecting dots on that. So
those are, I mean, that's what those systems are there for. I mean, the hour counts that I've been hearing from friends at work and stuff is, people are playing 40 plus hours, so once you're that deep into it, you are getting to understand the nuances of that stuff more, and you're probably going to want to, seek out certain things versus other things because you found your groove or whatever. But
yeah, no, that's possible. I mean, I'm the sort of person who has trouble if I don't have
clearer
sort of just the channel that I'm going down. It's a little clearer in the original God of War with, well, if you really like the ranged, really fast combat, put the blades up. If you like the slower, I'm going to do a ton of damage combat, put the sword, the Athena blade or whatever. And that's kind of your dichotomy of your main weapon. This one is very clearly does this. This one very clearly does that. But like, do this to your pommel, put this rune inside your wrist guard, put this other rune inside your shoulder guard. I mean, it's just like all that stuff is a little, it's a little heavy for me. And it's not a thing that I gravitate towards in general. I loved Diablo, right? But that was 20 years ago anyway, 20 something years ago. So I've kind of moved on from liking that sort of thing. And like I said, I'm the sort of person who tries to do the whole game with the starting equipment. Not necessarily the starting equipment, but like taking that first weapon and just making it the best thing it can be, and not to dig into like, oh, here's a million other things you can try. I'm just not as into that.
Yeah. I mean, regardless of the progression and upgrade and crafting system, I will say the axe design, from a game design perspective, is quite good. I'm really just the multiple uses of it and the ranged version of it, and like you already talked about, the calling it back and the way that they also integrate it into puzzles, which we haven't really even talked about, and it being kind of like
there's some environment navigation with it as well at times. And
just it's kind of your Swiss Army knife, right, in a cool way, which was a little bit of our goal with the climbing axe for Tomb Raider. That was kind of a signature thing as well, and so there's some similarities there, but I think it's kind of this there's a mystery around it, and it's kind of a mythological weapon, so it's got this ice thing, so it's just very clever in a lot of ways, and I like I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I like kind of economical design around a small number of things that work in interesting ways versus just kind of like going into the thousands, just to kind of like in the Borderlands direction or something. So I can appreciate that. I probably, if I keep playing, I'm playing on the default difficulty. I'm probably going to bump the difficulty down because I don't think I'm that good at the combat right now.
Yeah, no, I've stayed at that level. There have been a number of places where it's been a little challenging, including a boss battle where I just didn't know what I was supposed to do, but it ultimately gave me a hint, like, oh, do this. And I went, oh, of course, that's what you've been trying to tell me with that animation. So there have been times where it's been nice to have those hints, and that's something that wasn't really present in the past, but that's more of a modern game design thing as well, right? And that was starting to come in even to 13 years ago or something in 2005, and I think it was really a feature of the PS3 360 generation more than anything else. Is that's when that stuff really took hold with things like Assassin's Creed, where it was always telling you what you should be doing, and giving you lots and lots of map icons and things like that, to give you clear direction on where you should be going, what you should be doing at any given moment. And we were moving that direction the whole time. Certainly ease of use was a big part of what we were trying to do with Republic Commando at the end of the original Xbox. So it's not like it was a new idea, but anyway.
Yeah.
And the feel of throwing that axe and when it comes back, and
it's just very good.
Lots of really good craft around just those moments to really just accentuate them in just the small ways. Just like there's a little bit of like frame slowdown when it returns to his hand. There's a little bit of whatever and vibration in the controller, but just everything in that is very meticulous.
The audio,
and the audio is amazing in that moment. Yeah. So they've really paid off on some of the central stuff that they're doing in a really great way, which I would kind of expect of them. But and with 5 years to make this game, that's kind of what you get out the other side, I guess.
Yeah, and the other note I forgot to mention is on the it's weird. It's a weird feeling because on the violence side of it, that big fight you have in the beginning with the stranger, quote unquote, pretty cool, epic, Duke, just kind of
toe to toe,
fist fight
punch.
Essentially, with kind of two quote unquote gods, and it was very interesting.
It's basically like They Live.
Yeah. It was just epic. And really well shot and directed, and camera work was amazing. The funny thing about there's that melodramatic sense of spectacle in the violence from the original that we played. This one almost had a bigger impact on me because it's more grounded violence. So the camera being in closer and more intimate, and the punches and the way that the blood, and just like fists hitting faces and it's just way more visceral or something, and
I was going to say, it reminds me of that boxing game. Remember at the first, maybe at the beginning of 360?
No, not Final Fight.
Fight Night or Fight
Night. Yeah,
something like that. Anyway, it was a boxing game where they showed they'd slow down when the glove hit the face, and you could see the sweat, and then the face actually reacting, the flesh kind of rebounding and stuff. It feels like that, especially in that fight more than anything else so far of what I've played. That is, I agree. It makes it very intimate in a way that's kind of compelling. It makes the violence. It makes the violence less something you can just write off as.
It's definitely more compelling
or whatever.
But it makes me cringe more, is my point. It's harder to take because it's so maybe that's their point, but it's just with that particular fight, at least it was oof, that's rough. And I didn't care about the violence as much in the first one.
Yeah, that's interesting because so I'm thinking of course I immediately go, when I think of violence, I go to Westerns, and I think this is like Clint Eastwood at the end of his career in Unforgiven, when he shoots everybody in one room and they're none of them are more than 10 feet from him, versus, way back in the early ones where everybody's far apart, it's across a long town square or whatever, and nobody's nearby.
I mean, it's
sort of similar in that feeling.
Yeah, it's like Fight Club versus, Rocky or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just,
Rocky 4, I think you mean.
No. Well, maybe. I don't remember Rocky 4.
That's the one with Dolph Lundgren. I will break you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, melodrama.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, anyway, it's very, good on them. I mean, that keeping it alive, and it's kind of that nice pseudo reboot that but still kind of keeping things moving forward in a weird way. So I'm intrigued kind of about that stuff to see where they go with it. There's some nice touches even in the beginning, right, where he kind of he's chopping the tree down right in the very, very beginning, and then he kind of his wraps on his forearms.
Yeah, they come untied. Yeah,
come untied. And then for those who are kind of thinking about it, you kind of, I guess, kind of remember the chains. So there's this phantom pain kind of feel to it, which I thought was not the game.
Or V.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to play Metal Gear. That sounds good.
All right, well, let's call our discussion there. I think we're at 45 minutes. Let's just roll right into the feedback instead of taking a break. Okay. We have, I think we have three. We have three. I gave you the first one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ready?
I'm going to say it's from Gothic Chocobo, who comes to my stream. So hey, Goth.
Oh, nice.
But yeah.
Okay, yeah. So snakes, and the subject is snakes and ladders and cameras and death by from Gothic Chocobo. Hey, Brett and Tim, I'm loving the podcast, and I'm really enjoying Brett streaming the current game on the weekends. Though my wife isn't quite as happy as I am at me watching it. Despite me never getting into God of War series, I had my JRPGs at that point. I do, however, like the additional information Brett is able to provide between dying and being able to ask game dev related questions. Though the question that I currently have relates to Brett saying that he had issues in one of the fights because he didn't know that there was a ladder that he needed to climb. Brett said that it was a camera issue with a scripted camera that, from what I saw, panned and or followed the character along to path until the next camera took over. I would have thought it more of a level design issue. So, what in the definition / difference between bad camera design versus bad level design is in a case like this? What is the definition? Many thanks, Gothic Chocobo.
Yeah, so that was referring to that giant Minotaur fight, I forget, Iron Minotaur, something like that. Where I had trouble finding the stairs behind me. Mm-hmm. And I would say, actually, the problem there was more of a... Well, there were multiple problems. One was you entered that room, you got a cutscene. The cutscene moved you away from the stairs, which you would have naturally been next to if it had left you where you came in. Mm-hmm. So like you go in this room and it takes you away from where you would have gotten the information you would have needed. So I think that was just bad communication between the designer and the cutscene designer, or like how that was going to end and all that stuff. It's a little fluke, and it's the sort of thing I totally see happening. You're in dev and you know that there's a stair there, and you don't even see that the player hasn't had a chance to see it because you know it's there. So that's one thing. There's a little bit of an enemy design problem that comes into it because the Iron Minotaur will charge you and push you towards the edge of the room, and all you'll see is the walls on the side, so you won't know that one of those walls is a staircase. And I'm not sure who gets the responsibility there. It's really kind of a confluence of issues. And then finally, there was that element on the left side of the screen, which made me think there was something of interest over there, but which wasn't going to be used till much later, which is a that's a level design problem, I think. I think they might have been better served to have that elsewhere, just deeper in where you went next, rather than coming back out and being like, oh, now I can go that way. Hades shows up and gives you the new power. There was no way to tell that that's what that was, and going over there, I was just like, I'm confused. I'm standing on this. Am I supposed to stand on this to protect myself from attacks, or like it was a totally spurious thing in the moment, and I would have much rather. There's a number of ways you can solve things like that, like, you know what, that platform comes out after you kill the guy, or and that's very gamey, but sure, maybe that's what happens. Or he dies and he hits the wall and something falls down, right? I mean, there's a number of ways that you can solve issues like that, where it's like, it's not going to confuse you in the moment of that combat. So I think that's there may be macro design problems there, where it's like, well, we wanted to go in and come back out. I don't know who would have made that choice. I use camera in that case as sort of a, as just a shorthand of like, I couldn't see it, therefore I didn't know it was there. That's not necessarily the camera's fault. It's somebody not letting the camera do what it needed to do in that instance.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's well said. I think it definitely is a combination of things. It can be solved. I mean, when he, to his question of what is the definition or difference between bad camera versus bad level design, I think I had one of my topics in one of the episodes where I hit that sum, saying that for the most part, especially in third person games, they have to work together. So in a way, it's both. Usually, if there's an issue, it can be solved with either or. Of course, the other funny thing about that particular room is you come through there the first time without the Minotaur there and stuff. And I actually, when I went in there the first time, I ran up the stairs and was just exploring and found that thing, the lever. And so when I eventually came back in there to fight him, I knew the lever was already there because I found it the first time. So
I don't think I had been into that room before the combat.
Oh yeah, no, I went in there without any threat.
I think you might be able to explore, and you maybe
I did things in a different order. See, that's the problem with their fork in the road level design stuff, right? Where you don't know which
is something we did talk about. Yeah,
yeah. So, but yeah, and I think also even in the geometry, the level art, the staircase is not obvious the way that they built it, and I think they were opting for dramatic camera in that room more than usability, to be honest. Yeah. So lots of things they could have done. I bet quite a bit of it is usability. Like they didn't they didn't do usability testing enough on that room.
Yep.
And
I
think they didn't do that in many places in that game.
Yeah.
As we talked.
Yeah, I mean the one we had picked on in particular, I think, because I even having played the game before, I made the same mistake in the same place. So I totally, it feels like a thing that they didn't quite nail in a few places, but in general, camera was quite good. I've got one here from Zimmy Finger, and he put in quotes, "Not my real name."
I don't believe it.
Yeah, obviously, what parents don't want to name their kid Zimmy? Anyway, subject, love the show. Just some thoughts if you get the time, from Mr. Finger or Ms. Finger. Don't actually know. Or Goldfinger. Hello, Brett and Tim. Just want to talk about a couple of things. Question for Tim. Do you think the Eco series does anything differently than Silent Hill in terms of vagueness in storytelling? I got the impression you were a little concerned with Silent Hill's ambiguity and was curious if Eco's lore makes you feel more wonder over skepticism. Thank you so much for this podcast. It's very refreshing to hear two people talking about game mechanics. I appreciate you revealing game design vocabulary such as verb and lock and key. P.S. And then he has a link here. Two Ratchet and Clank devs going through the series talking about the evolution of the level design. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thought maybe you guys and listeners might get a kick out of it. He also had a game recommendation, which we don't read normally on the cast because we don't want to tease people, but we do keep track of those. So thanks for sending that in, Zimmy. Mr. Zimmy, Ms. Zimmy. Anyway, Eco, Silent Hill, ambiguity, vagueness, storytelling. Go.
Oh, thanks, Zimmy. That's an easy one. Nope, not an easy one. Interesting. It's a really interesting question because I definitely am generally critical of that, but then in that particular series and a couple others, I really love the less is more approach. The only thing that comes to mind, and I'm actually going to have to think about this one because it does apply sometimes to my to my actual job. It's a good question. The only thing that comes to mind initially, right off the bat, in the difference between those two for me is for the Eco series. I guess we can call this series or those games,
the related games,
the related games, kind of in their universe and their aesthetic and their style. I guess I don't feel a need or that there are missing elements that I need to enjoy it from the vagueness of the story or the left up to interpretation of the story, because it is a kind of the rules, the aesthetic rules of the world are kind of clear to me on what they're trying to do. And I think in Silent Hill, my vague memory of playing when we played that and having a comment like that is sort of more in I felt like I was missing something, or that I didn't know what the rules were about what is supposed to be vague. Like they kind of stepped into the door too far, and so I thought they needed to give me more. But in Eco, I don't think they step in the door at all, and they're just like, nope, you're just looking in the window. So good luck,
right.
You make a call.
One of the things about the two games is that Eco story doesn't change, whereas Silent Hill actually has multiple potential endings, and so there's some ambiguity that's basically leaving room for these different endings.
Oh, maybe so, yeah. But also, so
that's just a different weird thing, right? To not tell you things because they don't know which way you're going yet.
Yeah. But I mean, also,
so that's another difference.
That's a good point. Do you know my point though about kind of stepping through the door? Like even the first scene in Silent Hill, I think he mentions her name, right? And kind of why he's there, and I guess the other thing we should probably mention is using a language you can understand versus not.
Yeah, right. Sure,
is kind of quite a big difference too, where you kind of click your brain off because you don't feel like you need to know the details in Eco because of that. But anyway, like they introduce some of the story elements and characters in Silent Hill just enough to where you're curious, but then they kind of either leave it vague or don't give you enough of a closure on some of that stuff. At least the ending that I got or whatever, because I don't think I could even completely explain what happened to me in that game today. And thus I think I kind of like, oh, it's a fever dream or something, but in Eco, it's like, you're in this world, you're witnessing this happen, and it's left up to your interpretation. And I don't feel like I'm cheated of information. But once you start giving me some information, I think I want a little more. That's the only thing I can think of. But it's a fascinating question what the difference is. But
it's totally fair. I mean, I also think there is. I mean, you're very right that one in Eco and all three of them use nonverbal communication. I mean, they use verbal communication, but it's really only tone because, like you said, it's a language that nobody understands. It's not a real language. So you're only getting tone. You're only getting this is a question, or I'm beckoning, or whatever. Whereas with Silent Hill, it's localized in English, and we're hearing English, and so all those details our minds just grab onto and are trying to make sense of the whole time.
It feels like Silent Hill has a backstory and a sort of fiction and lore around it that I just didn't get. You know what I mean? And I don't feel like I was missing. Like the Eco games have that as well, but I feel more comfortable filling in the blanks myself.
I think what this means, Tim, is we need to play more Silent Hill games.
Well, I'm a believer of that franchise now. So
I'm glad to have made that conversion.
I'm fascinated by I don't know if it's the third one, but the one that's called The Room that supposedly takes place in
fourth one, I think.
Fourth one, yeah. Sounds intriguing to me. So
I have it. And I started playing it, but I was too busy playing Silent Hill 2 to be able to fit in time for The Room, but I'm going to get back to that myself at some point this year, I think. Once I have that room back, in the room in which that TV and Xbox is, there's been a guest. So it's occupied when I would have chances to play the video game. Anyway, I gave you a second email.
Oh boy, look who it is.
That's funny.
Subject: accommodating different play styles from my new nemesis, additional nemesis, Mark Garcia. Greetings, Brett and Tim. Thanks for a great series of casts on God of War, a game that holds a special place in my memory. You mentioned that the game was somewhat lopsided in its red orb reward system, as you stated. The better you are at comboing, the more orbs you get, and the more abilities you can power up unlock. Furthermore, you also postulated that some people might not fully explore the environments to find all the red orb chests as an alternative to those rewarded during combat. Ultimately, as you discussed, these two factors could contribute to a more difficult end game for those among us who are not great at combos and who also did not explore enough in the early levels of the game. You also mentioned that Sony Santa Monica may have been too far into development to accommodate for this situation when other issues such as crashes may have been more pressing. Throughout your discourse, you postulate that the only real way for players to address this imbalance was to decrease the difficulty. However, I sense a however coming.
Oh, and there it is.
There it is. I think that the dev team may have intentionally added discoverable items in Pandora's Temple to act as a quick fix for this issue, the Muse keys. Oh, interesting. Brett, I didn't get to watch your stream, so I don't know if you were able to find both Muse keys in Pandora's Temple. Finding both keys treats the player to a special Room of the Gods, complete with instant boosts to both Kratos' health and magic bars, and a chest loaded with several levels worth of red orbs. I think that the dev team's logic was if the player gets to a point in the temple where they can't defeat the enemies, they may instead choose to explore in an effort to find hidden red orb chests and eventually stumble onto both Muse keys. Based on their associated reward, does it sound like the purpose of the Muse keys was to assist those players who maybe didn't level up enough throughout the rest of the game? While not an ideal solution, do you think this is a reasonable late in development approach to trying to accommodate players' different play styles and ensuring that everyone could make it to the end of the game? Keep up the podcast, and Brett, please feel free to post more photos of Tim so that I can continue to Photoshop his head onto various video game characters' bodies. This is a trick that you made me read this out loud, and I should have read ahead and kept that last part out. Mark, you are
been done now.
that Kratos one, man, really got me.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Thanks, Mark. Wow, that's quite a good, interesting theory.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. So I did find both Muse keys.
I did too, but I didn't
find the Muse room. And I went. There's a link to a video that he provided, so I will put that in the show notes as well, so that that people can go look and say, oh, that's where it is. If you take the outer ring, you can move it around until you find a location where the Muse door is.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So you can push it around and basically find the Muse door.
That's clever.
It is clever. It never occurred to me. And I don't know how they would signal that. I think if it's meant to be some kind of balancing mechanic, I mean, the problem is that it's like really far away from where you actually need to line the thing up. So you don't need to go very far to line it up with what it needs to be lined up with. And you have to go quite a ways around, like maybe 3/4 of the way around to actually find the Muse room using that same mechanism. And it's the sort of thing where I think you can stumble on it because if you're thinking, oh, what's the next thing I got to do? I think by the time it would have occurred to me to do that, I was already moving on. I wouldn't have even remembered that I had done that.
Yeah, I didn't even think of it.
Yeah, I watched the video. I was like, oh, duh, of course. I'd never thought to push that thing around further because I found the hole that I needed, right? I found the hallway that was behind. And I just never went back to it. Hadn't made a note. I did split up those 2 sessions between weeks, I think. So there's a chance I might have found it if I had played it more continuously. But it would have been a better chance anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory, and I will say, as a design paradigm, it actually is a quite good one that I think good designs do tend to use, is rewarding different play styles in different ways based on their play styles, so to maintain balance. I would be skeptical if that was so intentional for this example, because it was, Yeah, you had three steps, three pretty hard steps to achieve this goal, because you had to find both the keys and the room
Right.
over multiple, I will say, quote unquote, levels to do it. So the success rate of that may be pretty low. I mean, if it was intentional, I definitely give him kudos on that. But Mark's totally right on as far as like how you should do this sort of thing. But I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, another way to do these sorts of balancing things is to just be sneaky.
Rubber banding.
Well, effectively, yeah. So my father asked me a long time ago. He said, "I saw you got a credit on Spider-Man 2." And I laughed and I said, "Oh, that's funny." And I asked Jamie Fristrom, who I think we mentioned last time as well, what happened there. And he said, "Well, I couldn't give you cash, so I gave you credit." The credit in this case was because we were talking about some areas they had in Spider-Man 2 where you basically were doing race missions, right? You were Spider-Man trying to catch up with some character, maybe Black Widow. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, some other character. You're trying to catch up with maybe Black Cat. Anyway, so you're trying to catch this other character, and if you stink at it and you keep failing, he's like he said, for some people this is really becoming a wall mission. They can't keep up with the cat. And I said, well, just slow her down. Just the third time they fail, just make her slower, and the seventh time they fail, make her even slower. They'll think they're getting better at doing it. Yeah, and I think that's a more effective in a game which is primarily an action game, even though there is some sort of light exploration in terms of finding these little secrets off to the side. I think it's better to just, oh, you know what? They haven't found 6,000 orbs that we expected they'd have found by now. Let's just give them 30% more with everything they kill. Mm-hmm. They will never know because they are not super meticulous players who are counting every orb. They'll just have more orbs. And they'll be able to do the powering up. That's how I would approach that balance issue late in a game, rather than let me add this other weird element that hasn't been super important in the past. I mean, there were those two keys, and partly I was on the stream and I didn't want to go trying to find that stuff, and because it's kind of boring to watch somebody basically kick the wall every 10 feet to see if there's a secret, right? I mean, that's just not fun to watch. So sometimes that gets in my way as a player. Streaming, but I wouldn't have thought of that though. I mean, looking at it, seeing the video, I went, "Oh, yeah, I would not have found that even if I'd been playing on my own." So, not effective if that's what it was for.
Yeah, I mean, the not exactly the same thing, but I feel like we probably talked about this when we played Link to the Past. But Nintendo tends to be pretty good at a pretty transparent dynamic difficulty mechanic. Zelda being the best example, but they do it kind of in Metroid and everything else too, I'd say. And that's when you're low on hearts and you slash the grass, you're going to more likely to get a heart. Yep. And when you're full on hearts and you slash the grass, you're more likely to get a rupee or something else, so bomb. Yeah. So, it's like that kind of like keeping track of how the player's doing and what they're doing, and then having some of the dynamic elements react to that. And that's even in a pretty, the player probably doesn't always notice that, but they're like, "Oh, a heart, that's just what I needed." Exactly. No, they know what you need.
We know what you needed. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, they're the masters of that. That's sort of just passive. Oh, here, this game is not meant to be super frustrating. Have a good time. Here's
auto balance.
Yeah, right. It just balances right out for you. And as soon as you know that, when I go looking through the grass, I might find something that I need, you just do it whenever you feel like you need something, or maybe all the time if you're kind of OCD, but which is kind of the downside of that. But then you're just getting a bunch of rupees, and at a certain point you're full. Your wallet's full, and there's no point now, so you don't do it anymore. So there are balancing things that kind of balance this stuff out no matter what.
I do. All that being said, I do agree with his thesis. You do want to definitely reward different play styles to, if you can, and to help that balance over time. If you don't do something like Brett was saying with rubber banding or something, so it's a good notion. This one seems a little bit more difficult to to stomach for me, though.
Yeah. So people know the rubber banding term that Tim's throwing about. Like everybody says that all the time, refers especially to racing games where characters who are behind get benefits that make them more able to catch up. Whether or not that, or pulling back the AIs that are far in front and making them slow down effectively to keep it close, so it feels like you are still in the race, even if they just let the AI go. They clean your clock. So that's where that comes from, and that's totally a Nintendo thing as well. First seen, I'm sure, in Mario Kart, because where else?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm claiming that somebody's going to email in and say, no, it was actually this obscure racing game from 1938. Anyway.
1938.
Yeah. So that's it. That's all we've got for this week. This is kind of a bonus episode talking about a more modern game. And thanks, Tim, for digging in and playing that and playing some more God of War with me. I appreciate it. I appreciate it, boy.
Oh, okay. There you go.
You can send email to us at devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com. Did I say that all right? I think I did. And of course, you'll find there our show notes and the archive for all the shows. You can also find all that stuff on iTunes and Google Play and wherever you get your podcasts. I think you can even ask your Alexa to play the most recent Dev Game Club, although it will not, to my knowledge, read you the show notes. Yeah, somebody asked me for that one time a while back, and I did it. So it's there.
Cool.
In any case, in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville and at Twitch at Brett Duville, _. And he's at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I wanted to also mention at Dev Game Club, our Twitter feed, because of course that is where we'll probably talk about what next week. We know what our next game is going to be. We're still trying to get a couple of interviews for this, but of course, everybody who worked on the God of War series, who's still with it, is on break right now. Good for them. They deserve it because that's been a long project, and they deserve every reward they find. So we'll see. We'll see if we can nail that stuff down. So we may have an interview for you next week. If we can get them at any point, we will just slot them into the schedule. So we'll let you know sort of later in the week about what we'll be playing. I may have a chance to stream again over the weekend. We'll see. I have company, so maybe not. That's it for us this week. So I guess I'll say to you, sir, good night, boy.
Good night.